we got nails from the, oh shit.
Nails is another term. If you guys want to Google that, you can find out what that's going to mean, but it's going to be just very quick. It'll be that he's received some kind of indication on his radar warning receiver.
Not allowed.
Yeah, if you definitely shot down an aircraft, you definitely don't want to be that close to them exploding. You know, they're throwing out all kind of shrapnel.
All these different buttons right here inside the cockpit. Everything you see here.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious how that would feel, you know, doing your virtual reality, not having a throttle and stick. You know, you don't get that sensor feedback of, you know, moving, you know, on the throttle. You might have something similar to like a mouse cursor. So I'm not kind of sure how that would feel, or I guess not feel, if you don't have the throttle. One of the great things about the F-35 is that, you know, even though there's different variants, like the A model, which is kind of like an Air Force more centric, where it's a conventional landing and takeoff, versus a B model, which is for the mainly for the Marine Corps. It's more that VTOL, that vertical takeoff and landing kind of role. And you have the Navy variant, the C model, which is more for the carrier landing and takeoff. Inside the cockpit, it's very, very similar between each aircraft. You know, one of the other great things about the F-35 is that it's a side stick, which means the control stick is not in between your legs. It's just way, way more comfortable to operate, especially if you're at higher G, or if you're just flying like a long distance. It's just way, way more ergodynamic just to kind of sit there and relax. And while in the past, like you might have had a VTOL aircraft, like a, you know, like a Harrier, that's more designed for an air ground or attack role. F-35s now, F-35Bs, which, you know, they can do both. They're for the Navy, like we'll call it like a strike fighter. So they can both employ ordnance on the ground, or they can fight against enemy aircraft and do both and have both roles. So that's more of like a modern kind of concept. Unfortunately, kind of as you're seeing here, kind of from this first-person perspective, you've got that canopy bow. So unfortunately, the F-35 newer aircraft, you've got the canopy bow kind of still blocking your vision. Tell us it's not an F-35. Very, very quickly, F-35s don't have HUDs or a heads-up display. That's all in our helmet. So whether you're looking straight or even kind of off axis, even like over your shoulder, you still have all that heads-up display information provided to you. One of the other great things is that as we get newer technology, not just in the aircraft, but in simulators, they've moved to both the Navy and the Air Force have moved towards different ways of training pilots. As virtual reality gets, you know, more and more fleshed out, it has the possibility of definitely being a viable way of training pilots. Now, it's never going to fully replace the ability of you know, jumping that aircraft and feel the aircraft buffeting when you're at high speed or low speed or under G, and not going to replicate that high G-force where kind of you just saw him moments ago. It looked like he was like graying out potentially. Something that you do an anti-G straining maneuver to kind of keep that blood in your upper body, your torso and brain, so you don't G-lock, whether that's a gray out or a blackout, and completely lose consciousness. Ability to, or that unfortunately you can crash the airplane in a CFIT or controlled flight into terrain, and losing consciousness is a great way to do that if you if that's the adjective you want to use to describe.
Not allowed.
Yeah, if you definitely shot down an aircraft, you definitely don't want to be that close to them exploding. You know, they're throwing out all kind of shrapnel and stuff, not just from the missile, but from the aircraft parts kind of out there. And jet engines are very, very sensitive, so if they ingest a piece of debris, or we'll normally call it FOD, so foreign object or debris, compressor blades or fan blades, and it has potential to just completely ruin that motor. Something like an F-35, you've only got one engine, so if that engine's gone, you're flying the aircraft to the scene of the crash, unfortunately.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so it looks like he was taking off from a road. At least in the U.S., we don't really practice that too much. You definitely have aircraft like a C-130 or something like that might be taking off from like an outlying field or a grass field. But if you go on like YouTube, you could search for other countries, you know, taking off aircraft from runway, or not from runways, but from roads. You know, if you're dropping bombs and you're trying to deny aircraft from taking off so you can achieve air supremacy, it's definitely a viable solution to just blow up the runways and taxiways, because then aircraft might not be able to take off, and instead of using 100 bombs, you might be able to use 12 just to destroy the runways and taxiways. Flying low levels is awesome, and depending on your comfortability and what aircraft you're in, you might actually, you know, go into canyons and fly through them. It's definitely a great way to block enemy radars from seeing through. If you've seen the newest Top Gun, they kind of do a similar kind of scenario where they're kind of ingress and low level through canyons. We're not going to be flying through like this tight through any kind of structures. After you've flown an aircraft for hundreds of hours, you're going to get a pretty good idea of how far your wingtips kind of extend out to your left and right based off your how good of a pilot you are and what your risk tolerance is. You might get a little more aggressive than some other guys in terms of canyons or kind of terrain that you're willing to fly low through. But anything that close is just asking for a crash or a mistake.
Oh, we've got a strike team up there now.
Yeah, so you just heard he preset tanks to be jettisoned. Again, that's something that's very, very realistic. If you're in a aircraft that's configured for both roles, both air-to-air and air-to-surface or air-to-ground, if you have bombs on and you expect to get in a dogfight, you might pre-select to jettison all your air-surface bombs off because you're not going to be able to use those in a dogfight. So you might just get those and just drop them like wherever, like in the ocean or over land, obviously only in a combat scenario, but that's going to be less weight that you're carrying, so the aircraft can perform better. A newer fighter that has an internal weapons bay, those bombs are sitting out on the wingtips, which are increasing your radar cross section, so it's easier to find new radar, and they're just putting more drag on the aircraft as the airflow is going over them. So the aircraft's going to perform way, way better, and it's 100% noticeable once you get rid of, especially the bigger the bomb, how the aircraft handles better. But I do like the realism here. As he's pulling heavy G, you can see it starting to come in, kind of his eyesight or vision. People have different things where they might get like curtains where they're coming down vertically or closes in from the sides, or they might lose just color. So now they're seeing just in like a monochrome or a black and white or gray. And one of the things that everybody in the US is going to do who goes into a fighter or attack aircraft that has the ability to pull Gs, they're going to go to a centrifuge and kind of just practice to see how they handle it. If you guys can hear kind of that background noise, you might have, depending what aircraft you fly, a warning sensor or something similar to like a radar warning receiver or something that, based off a bunch of different parameters and filters and sensors, is gonna provide you maybe like a notice that you're being targeted or searched for by other enemy sensors, and they're gonna work to different levels of reliability or how comfortable you feel with it. If you're operating in an environment where you think it's gonna work reliable, it's 100% something that you're gonna maybe not solely rely on, but something that you're going to incorporate into, hey, maybe I need to defend now, or I need to turn away and run based off what you're hearing, what it's telling you.
Why am I not getting it? There you go.
So a lot of aircraft are going to have a ground collision avoidance system or a GCAS, and they're going to tell you like, hey, pull up. At least in F-18 we call it bitch and Betty. So she'd give you a pull up, like kind of in fast like that. And on your heads-up display, you kind of get a gigantic X-dioed display that'd be overlaid over your altitude, your airspeed, and your pitch ladder. Just so now you're solely focused on pulling up. Newer fighters, like an F-35, we actually have something that if it senses that you're gonna crash into the ground and you have the software enabled and it's working properly, it'll actually take control of the aircraft, just like a F-16 would, and it's gonna manipulate not only the flight controls but throttle as well. So if you're going to hit the ground, it'll pull you away, and then if your airspeed gets too low, it'll actually accelerate the throttle, get the motor to produce more thrust. So now not only you're flying away, but you're accelerating so you don't kind of stall and kind of re-hit the ground or possibly re-hit the ground. In the newer fighters, we're going to have a G limiter. So if you pull back on the stick too much, it kind of prevents you from over-G'ing the aircraft. You have the ability to override it and be like a paddle switch or a switch on the stick. That's going to allow you to pull up to kind of the maximum load of the aircraft. But now, depending on how many G you introduce on the aircraft, you have the possibility of bending panels, bending flight controls. That aircraft, especially if you exceeded the limit by a lot, that aircraft is going to be down for a while. It's not going to fly for a while. Its maintenance kind of goes over that aircraft with a fine-tooth comb, searching for any kind of issues with aircraft before they allow it to fly again. I can't tell how low he's flying right now, but in real life, like if you are in a combat scenario, like you'll fly as low as you can if it's in the right kind of set of circumstances. So if you've identified that you need to be at a low altitude, or if you're in a dogfighting, you might be at a low altitude for various different reasons. If it's just an ingress, you might be 100 feet off the ground or something like that, just to provide a margin of error. In training, we're gonna have rules, so depending which service you're in or which country you fly for and which aircraft community you're in, it might be 100 feet, it might be 200 feet in training. that you go no lower than except for takeoff and landing. You know, if you're in a higher risk kind of thing, like you're dogfighting, and like if you've ever seen like Top Gun, they set like the hard deck, and hey, like that's actually like a railing that will set. So you don't be like, hey, for today it'll be no lower than 5,000 feet, and while you're fighting, you're not allowed to go below 5,000 feet. Like it's like an arbitrary ground level that you've set now. So if you go below there, you simulate that you died and you flew into the ground.
Let that missile go pitbull. It's not reaching.
You just heard him mention that he's gonna let that missile go pitbull. He's shooting a radar missile, and you know, if you Google the term, you're gonna have to, you know, so you don't get the singer, you have to Google pitbull with like some kind of military follow-on, whether like, you know, what is the term pitbull in military aviation, but you'll see that's going to kind of denote the missile, the radar-guided missile is entered into a certain kind of phase. And depending what phase that missile is in, especially if you shoot a modern missile and the missile now enters into an active phase, the missile is kind of doing its own thing. It's not necessarily relying on the aircraft's radar anymore. That might determine how you're going to operate, whether, you know, you continue doing what you're doing or you kind of shift to a different mindset. Looks like he's actually wearing something similar to like an F-35. Normally, if you're in an F-15, you're going to be either flying with like a normal helmet that's got, you know, just a regular helmet with a visor, or with a JHMX, which is short for Joint Helmet Cueing Mounting System. And those are the two type of helmets that normally the F-15 or even F-18, F-16 guys are going to wear. But it probably wasn't an F-15 if he just landed on the carrier. So I'm kind of curious what aircraft it actually was. You know, if an F-15 or Air Force or one of those fighters try to land on a carrier, while they do have a tailhook on those aircraft, it's not beefed up to the ability that, you know, to fully stop the aircraft in that short of time. It's kind of intended for to catch a wire on a runway, where that wire is going to slow down the aircraft over, you know, maybe 1,000 feet, twice in like 100 feet. They try that, it's going to rip the tailhook right off.
Are you dipping out? Oh, goddamn.
Missile inbound.
So let's see what we can pull from this in terms of realism or whatnot. Again, not really a helicopter pilot here, or I've never really, you know, hands-on flown a helicopter. My experience has been like in the back, just riding along.
Yeah, I was watching it track into them the whole time. Yeah, just put your SOI on your tabs.
Oh, we got nails from the, oh, shit.
Nails is another term. If you guys want to Google that, you can find out what that's going to mean, but it's going to be just very quick. It'll be that he's received some kind of indication on his radar warning receiver. So again, that's something you would also kind of communicate out to your flight that, hey, I'm getting indication that, you know, I'm either being targeted or someone's searching for me in this piece of the sky. So they're in a two-person helicopter, but whether you're in a two-person helicopter or aircraft, or even if one of the personnel sees that, you know, you need to put out chaff flare, they're going to communicate that if they can't do it themselves. And then, yeah, you can see one of the huge drawbacks of flying a helicopter is that pretty much all of them, if not all of them, don't have an ejection seat. So you can see, you know, you kind of just ride it in. We kind of talked about if you're at low altitude versus high altitude, kind of the pros and cons or the benefits and negatives from one device to the other. But, you know, even if you're in an airplane and flying out low and you get hit and you kind of start to go down, if you're that low, you've got almost no time to react, not just to save the aircraft, but, you know, if you make the determination how to eject, you have almost no time if you're that low compared if you're, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20,000 feet up in the air. One of the other things that we'll take into account, because he's in a city environment or what we'll normally call like an urban environment, is you might have some bombs on board or weapons on board that you would love to use, or the guys on the ground would love you to use, but you have to take into like collateral damage concerns or collateral damage estimates. You might not be able to employ the weapon you want, or you might not be able to employ the weapon at all, you know, especially if they're next to a sensitive area like some kind of religious thing, whether it's a mosque, a church, a synagogue, or if they're near a hospital or something like that. The enemy or whoever you're going against is also going to take into account, because they know, especially nowadays, how that stuff's going to be publicized or put out on the news or on TV or whatever, that, hey, this bomb went off target, or, hey, while it might have done what you wanted it to do, you have these unintended side effects, and that's going to take up the bigger news. It's going to build bad publicity, so you have to be very, very careful. You know, before we went on deployment, or when we were on the aircraft carrier before going in combat, we had a rules of engagement briefing that we received from a JAG, which is a military lawyer, to kind of talk about, hey, what we could do and what we couldn't do, because that's also a huge, huge thing that we have to take into account as we go in. And I'm also surprised in a two-person helicopter like this, like one of them has to say chaff flare. The person in the front and the back, whether it's the pilot and the weapons systems officer, or the radar intercept officer, electronic warfare officer, whatever they're called, whichever aircraft you fly, both of them have the ability to put out the chaff and or the flare, just because usually when you're putting it out in a time-sensitive manner, relaying it via voice instruction to the other person in your cockpit, that's going to be just an unnecessary time delay. Where it might become a factor is if you're flying with wingman, if you're in a single seat or if you're in a 2-seat and your wingman sees a missile being shot at you, they might tell you over the radio to put out chaff flare. They might tell you to execute a turn to the left or right, and they would do that in a directive manner. So they might be like, they might use your call sign. They might tell you, hey, turn left, turn right, or brake left, brake right. And then from there, it's kind of an instinctual thing where someone tells you to do that, you put it out, and then you start looking out, trying to maneuver the aircraft or figuring out what to do, because you don't have the full picture, you don't have the full situational awareness yet.
Off to the right, yep.
Chaff flare.
Yep, I'm dropping it. It's coming. Oh, that was
We're good.
So normally when we're flying around, you're talking with wingmen or other flight members or other flights. There's very precise comm that you're going to use. Once you kind of degrade to, we'll jokingly call it trucker comm or trucker communication. It's not unprofessional. It definitely can be, but when you're kind of just breaking down and you're just trying to just figure out and trying to say whatever you can, but once you kind of go down that path, it leaves open to interpretation in terms of what exactly you're saying. So you need to try to be as clear and concise as possible.
Yep, right there. Bring it up to the left.
Yeah, we can see he's getting NWS warning or caution there. I would assume that's a missile warning system. So that'd be very, very similar to the, something that might be tied into your radar warning receiver, stuff like that.
I don't like not having a gunner.
I got eyes on the.
You hear them getting the altitude warning. Again, that's something that you might be setting some kind of parameters in your aircraft, or if you descend below a certain altitude, it'll go off and it'll tell you altitude, altitude, altitude. So you either don't hit the ground, or you might use it for various other things just to help you out. Especially if you're operating in a dynamic environment where you're trying to do other things, it's very easy to lose kind of situational awareness.
We're rolling over.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how survivable that was. Usually when helicopters go down, if it's not in a controlled manner, whether it's an auto rotation or like a controlled crash, it doesn't usually end up too well. They don't glide as well as airplanes if you've got that rotor or two spinning either above you or behind you. Hey Gamology, if you want to check out another expert to react like the VTOL VR, you can go follow Gamology on Facebook or YouTube. You can do so for myself at DGREGR on Instagram. I hope to see you all next time on another Expert to React.